Good day, I'm Dan and I like to make props. However, mostly helmets, as you may have worked out. And in this video, I'm making another helmet. This is the Skyrim City Guard's helmet. Watch how I start with this 2D screenshot and finish with this. This part I made for the back of the helmet. Comment and take a guess how many scales you think I used, and I will reveal the answer later in the video. And whilst you're down there, you might as well subscribe. Enjoy the video. Here are templates I made using screenshots from in the game, along with PowerPoint to measure dimensions and a few prototypes, all to achieve the most accurate design possible. I began by transferring all the patterns onto different thicknesses of EVA foam. For the bucket of the helmet, which till now I've been calling the bowl, I used 10mm thick foam. For the foundations of the helmet's main features, I used 8mm thick foam. For a majority of the detailing, I used 2mm thick foam. And for the minor detailing, I used 1mm thick foam. I took the chunky foam pieces outside as I knew the next step would get messy. Using my Dremel with a rough grit sanding bit, I did a quick pass over all rough edges on all 4 of the bucket pieces, where my initial cutting them out was less than sublime. Then, for the top portion of the edges that would make up the top of the bucket, I added a progressively sharper bevel. After that, I corrected my terrible cutting skills for the remaining 8mm pieces. Returning inside, the next thing to do was to assemble the bucket. As the glue of choice for a great deal of this project, I'm using EVO contact adhesive. To use this glue, I apply a thin strip along both contact points. Then, where I should probably have used a brush, I instead used my glove finger to spread the glue across the whole surface. Finally, I smashed the 2 pieces together, and now they are forever together forever. Repeating this gluing and smashing process some more times, I ended up with a complete bucket. Off camera, I neatened up the joins with my Dremel and heat shaped the bucket into a more accurate representation of the images, which was a back and forth process that no one wants to see. Moving on from the bucket, the next part to assemble were the eyes. The eyes will be made up of several layers, starting off with two 2mm pieces. I dab both contact points with some adhesive and smash them together into one piece. I then dab the surface again and first attach this small detail before adding the next 1mm thick layer on top. Next, I take the now 5mm thick eyepiece for a quick trip outside. Using my Dremel with a smooth grit grinding head, I add a bevel round the inside of the eye hole. Now, with the 8mm thick eyepiece, I first used some painter's tape to cover up what I didn't want to get messy. Next, using this quick seal caulk, I squeezed out a generous amount of the caulk and then used my finger to spread it across the surface. After this, I went over the surface again with a wet finger to blend and smoothen the caulk. Before the caulk could dry, I used a square piece of aluminium foil to dab away at the wet caulk, which added low ridges onto the surface that mimicked a rough hammered texture. Before then spraying some water over it and letting it fully dry. With the 8mm foundation now dry, I stuck the two eye parts together. Then, to finish off, I added the final detailing, consisting of an extra 1mm layer onto the bottom edge, 3 2mm thick foam circle rivets, along with some off-screen sanding and shaping. However, one eye wasn't enough, so I used my magic ability to copy and paste a second eye into existence. Next to make were the mouth plates. I assemble the 3 layers together, one after another, before teleporting outside for some shaping. I added a bevel onto both inside and outside edges and created a bevel round the breathing vent. Finishing the mouth plate off, I add some rivet details before duplicating a mirror copy for later use. Next were the ear protection / chin strap pieces. Nice and simply, I added an extra 1mm layer around the outside before going outside to touch grass and to remove the sharp edges from around both parts. Once there was no chance I could cut my fingers on the edges, I slapped the 2 parts together and added a large rivet. And bam! Now there's 2. Now to assemble the back of neck piece. This piece took the longest by far to assemble, and you'll see why. To begin, I glue up the connection points. Spread the glue with my finger and violently force all three parts of the foundation together. Here I have three different sized scale mail pieces in small, medium and large, all made using 2mm thick foam. And here's only a handful of how many I ended up using. Working from bottom to top, I start off by using the larger scales and end with the small ones. Now, here's a time lapse of 2.5 days straight, sticking down 204 scales, and trying not to get high on the fumes from the glue. However, the result was worth it. Smashing the piece against the table worked wonders with cleaning up any overhanging scales. The final parts to be assembled were the pieces that would add detail and shape to the bucket. Layering these pieces is as demonstrated. At a snap of my finger, the final layer was added and all outside edges were beveled. Replicating a similar process for the rest of the bucket details now meant I could go and make the bucket look more interesting. I slap the front detailing along with the nose onto the front of the bucket, and then slapped the two side pieces on too. Next to put together were the two halves of the face. But first I used my heat gun on the eye plate to soften the foam so I could shape it. I then used my heat gun on the mouth plate to shape that as well. Now that the eye and mouth plates were semi-round, I forced them together to make one side of the face. The other side of the face was already ready to go, so I grabbed both by the cheek and fused them together with the nose to complete the face. I then went straight ahead and added the ear flaps. Snapping my finger conveniently added this extra detail that hid any gaps. And finally, to cover up the naked space at the back of the helmet, I next added the neck piece. Then soon added the last bucket decoration on top of that. Off camera, I finished most of the rivet detailing using some more 2mm circle cutouts. However, for the last little bit of detailing, I'm using these crushed galvanised nail heads, which I show off how to make in the previous video. To attach the tiny metal nail heads, I'm using these pair of scissors with a magnet attached, along with some super glue gel. I applied some super glue where I wanted the rivets to be fixed, and then poked the nail head into place till the glue dried enough to remove the magnetic scissors, leaving behind a pretty realistic looking rivet. I then repeated this process up the nose and over the top of the helmet. For the final step of the assembly, like the cherry on top of the cake, I was going to make a spike for the top of the helmet. To make the spike initially, I sandwiched two 10mm pieces of foam together. Then I went outside and using a sanding bit on my Dremel, I carved out the shape of the spike to the best of my ability. Returning inside with a decent attempt at a spike, I used the heat gun to harden the foam into shape. I then used some more quick seal caulk to fill in most of the rough texture. I spread a liberal amount over the spike adding some water to smoothen the paste. Off camera, I made a pedestal for the spike using 2 layers of 2mm foam that I then slammed on top of the helmet. Finally, I used some super glue to permanently fix the final piece that would complete the helmet assembly. The next stage is to paint the helmet black. For the first few coats of paint, I'm using this Plasti-Dip spray, which works well with foam as it has a flexible rubbery finish and acts as a primer for more paint to go on top. After 2 coats on the outside and inside of the helmet, the next layer of paint is just a matte black spray paint. Before the paint dries, I'm using this upholstery foam sponge to print a hammered metal-like texture only onto the parts that would be painted in silver later. Fast travelling back inside, after waiting in a loading screen, gave enough time for the paint to fully dry. Snapping my finger, then turned the helmet almost entirely blue with painter's tape, covering everything apart from the 4 sides of the bucket. I mixed white, black and umber brown acrylic paints together to get this slightly desaturated brown colour, which I then applied to the untaped spaces using a flat painter's brush. After a few layers of this brown had dried, I added some black to the brown to make it darker, which I mixed with a little water and painted on, only round the edges. I then got some of the original brown, mixed it with water and painted round the middle, just up to the edge of the darker paint. Then, using a clean but wet brush, I blended the 2 shades of brown together, using a circular motion. After this, I finished by using a clean but dry brush to better blend the browns. The effect I was trying to achieve was to have a gradual gradient from dark brown around the outside, leading into a lighter brown on the inside. After several attempts, I settled on this look and moved on to painting the same effect on the other 3 sides. Next, I'm using this clear, semi-gloss spray paint to give the 4 sections a slight sheen when reflecting light. I transitioned back inside, snapping my finger, switched the tape round, revealing all the parts I was now going to paint silver, using this silver acrylic paint and this taped up brush. To apply the paint to the helmet, I adopted a dry brushing technique, which is where I brush off most of the paint onto a scrap piece of paper before using the brush on the helmet. The first coat of silver is finished and looking decent, but the helmet needed a second coat. For the next layer, I used this true gold acrylic paint, which I mixed heavily with water and applied using this small sponge brush. I spread the water and paint mix over the helmet a section at a time, before then using a paper towel to dab away most of the paint before it had too long to dry. I made sure to soak up any built up paint around the edges of the detailing. This layer gave the helmet a slight bronzy hue, which had a nice effect. I continue to do this for the rest of the helmet apart from the scaly neck piece. That will just remain silver. For the last major coat of colour, I added some black acrylic paint to a pot, along with some water, and mixed them thoroughly together. I then went ahead and plastered the helmet with the wash. I later used a clean dry sponge brush to blend the wash and collect any extra congregated paint so that there were no dark patches. Lastly, I used some more silver paint to highlight around the edges of the helmet's details and rivets. The final thing left to paint were the eyes. Nice and simply, I began with a layer of dry brushing using the silver paint, and then finished with a black wash, which I then gently dabbed at with a tissue, leaving most of the wash behind to dry. With that, the final step now complete, we can conclude this build and video with the showcase. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you enjoyed by leaving a like and a comment. Also comment any suggestions you'd like to see me attempt to make in the future. Additionally, if you'd like to be kept in the loop with this channel's development, consider subscribing. It's not like you're being scammed for all your worth or anything. See you next time.